This April, Mark and I decided to fulfill one of the wishes on my retirement bucket list and take an 11-day road trip to the Southwest. We chose a route that would satisfy Mary's desire to see some of Utah's national parks and Mark's desire to witness some archaeological sites in person. The trip met those expectations and more, and all in all was worth braving hours in the car, driving over 2,300 miles, and multiple stays in 7 different hotels. One of our first stops was at this Idaho rest area and natural area. The Hell's Half-Acre Trail overlooked some of the most intact, old-growth sage juniper shrub steppe we had ever seen. Mark saw a yellow-bellied marmot while I hiked up the trail to get a territorial view. We drove out across the northern Utah desert to the railroad ghost town of Kelton on the Transcontinental Railway backcountry byway. We learned about the Chinese and Irish workers who did the work and the other people who oversaw and supported them, and were impressed by the stark beauty of the desert environment. I couldn't imagine living and working there, but it was a great experience to visit. We saw a black-tailed jackrabbit and were serenaded by meadowlarks all afternoon. Our first day in Moab, we took a guided Jeep tour in Canyonlands National Park's Islands in the Sky unit. The scenery was spectacular. The Colorado River wound through deep canyons as the Jeep road wound along the steep canyon walls. Yikes! The next day, we drove to the Needles district of Canyonlands to the south of Moab. We visited Newspaper Rock, where centuries of people have left their marks, stories, and messages. We had a wonderful hike entirely on rock, aptly named the Slick Rock Trail, and saw amazing rock formations. Mary especially enjoyed this day. We stopped and looked at plants and lizards and took lots and lots of photos. day we explored the high mesa in southwestern Colorado at Mesa Verde National Park. It was too early in the season for guided tours into the cliff dwellings, but we got great views of them from a distance and managed to see everything that was open before sunset. We learned a bit about how ancestral Puebloan people lived and how they built their homes and gathering places from around 550 to 1300 AD. There were no hikes on this day, but I managed to log 5 miles on my iPhone health app anyway. We hiked Hovenweep National Monument's 2-mile trail down through and around an intermittent creek canyon where a group of ancestral Puebloan people built a community around 1230 AD. These structures were stone towers, mostly on the rim of the canyon. This counted as a hike for Mary and brought us closer to some amazing ancient ruins. Mark found 2 artifacts that, of course, we left in place on site. One was a small carved black marble-shaped stone. The other was an amber flake chip. Wish I had taken a picture. After Hovenweep, we drove back to Moab. We managed to squeeze in a sunset drive through Arches National Park that night, and we're so glad we did. It was a beautiful drive and made for a great finale to the Utah portion of our adventure. The next 2 days, we drove through miles of Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming, along the Wyoming border, crossing it several times on our way to Jackson, Wyoming. We were surprised to see one oil tanker truck after another on a narrow mountain pass highway, but soon found oil well pumps tucked into the narrow valley and a chatty flagger who told us about big oil fields beyond. The weather changed during the day, and we took a cold, windy evening wildlife tour in Jackson Hole and Teton National Park. We saw lots of wildlife, including more elk than I could have imagined, but we did not linger long at any of the stops to watch animals through the telescope. Brr! The next morning, we visited the National Gallery of Wildlife Art in Jackson Hole. We had visited this huge private gallery before in 2004 on our first road trip together. We especially appreciated seeing the two huge original Joseph Wolf paintings. Very dramatic compositions. From there, we drove through spring snowstorms to Ennis, Montana, and in the morning poked around Virginia City and Nevada City, historical gold rush towns. We enjoyed talking with the few shop owners who were open in the off-season. We hope to return sometime in the summer when everything is open. From there, we drove home and were so happy to sleep in our own beds. One takeaway that Mark noted was the vast expanse of desert, grasslands, and shrub steppe always dotted with cattle. We got to appreciate the scope of the cattle industry and understand just how huge it is when you drive over these huge tracts of land and all you see is cattle. It's all private. You see how big cattle ranches are and why they have so much political influence. We both enjoyed seeing some of our beautiful natural wonders, learning about flora and fauna in different ecosystems, and exploring ancestral dwelling places. We learned a lot, wore ourselves out, and were reminded that there are a lot of really wonderful places in this world, but there's really no place like home.